What's going on, y'all? I'm KM Best, and these are the decks that did the best in my sub-tournament Best of the Besties.
KM Best in a snap.
So, we had a sub-tournament over the weekend, the Best of the Besties tournament, with a $500 prize pool open to all of my subscribers, and we definitely had some people from outside my community come in and subscribe as well just to get entry to it, because I know the prize pool was good enough to incentivize people to try really, really hard. And as you can see, the winner of it, it's gonna be Shuri. But let's talk about not just the deck that won, but the best performing decks, and maybe look at some under the radar candidates from Best of the Besties. So jumping into this Shuri list, you'll notice that it is almost stock, card for card, the exact list I posted in my video about what decks will be good after the nerfs. Now, one thing you'll notice that has changed is there is no longer a Vision in the deck, and instead there is a Captain Marvel. Now, why is this? In my opinion, and in the opinion of the person who played this deck, Moyen, it is for a slight mirror edge. A lot of the situations that you run into in battle mode will come down to 50-50s, where you have to guess where a unit goes. And while Captain Marvel does not solve every single one of these situations, she's an excellent play on turn 6 in order to make those situations more functional for you. And the fact that you're playing her pretty often on turn 6 means that she's a lot harder to do math around. You sort of always have to keep her in mind if she's not on the board and you know your opponent has her. So this is definitely a deck that can leverage that. Now, I do think Vision is a little bit of a better bit. I do think, okay, hold on. We're just going to cut that. I'm going to pick it up there. Now, I do think that Vision is a little bit better as a secondary target for your Shuri, but if you assume that your main Shuri targets are just She-Hulk and Red Skull, you should be good to go in terms of how this deck plays out. Not that you never Shuri Captain Marvel, you absolutely do. It's just not necessarily the most common line you're going to take. You're really using Captain Marvel to pin your opponent in an unwinnable situation. That's kind of the idea. And it's also important to keep in mind that there are a lot of games where, you know, if you don't draw Shuri, you just have to play as a normal mid-range deck. You can do things like pass into Captain Marvel She-Hulk, or they think you're going to play Captain Marvel She-Hulk, you pass into Captain Marvel Red Skull. It gives you a lot of sort of intimidation value, in my opinion. And this list went 11-0 in the tournament. Shuri was this list, or a list one card off from it, with 6 of the 8 slots in the top 8. To me, it is clear Shuri is the best deck in the game. You can play Captain Marvel for a slight edge in the Shuri mirror. It should be extremely important to you that the 2 lists that met in the final both played Captain Marvel. So it was a 12-card mirror in the final, exact. And the player that won it all was, of course, Moyen. And Moyen, I believe KJB, the player he played in the finals, had been an advocate of Captain Marvel before. Moyen finally was like, all right, I think this mirror advantage is actually more important than having Vision in other matchups. So he went for the mirror advantage, and he was rewarded 11-0. So 7-0 in the Swiss. Won every game in the grand finals, which were best of 3. Extremely great performance from Moyen. And I do have a couple notes that might inform how you play this deck based on how he played this deck. So first thing that I wanted to point out about what Moyen did that other people aren't doing, Titania is a phenomenal card for locking up lanes. There are plays that happen with Polaris plus Titania on turn 4 that honestly might actually just be stronger than playing Shuri some of the time. Titania is an absolute lane winner in this deck if you can set her up. And one thing that struck out to me while I was watching Moyen play this list is just how powerful Titania is if you're good at using her. And he was, in my opinion, the best at using her in the entire tournament, and it showed. One of the things that Captain Marvel also does here is she lets you get a Titania back on turn 6, and then the Captain Marvel moves out of the Titania lane. That's another thing that, like, that is Captain Marvel's main advantage over Vision, is that she moves even if you play her on turn 6. That's her big selling point, and the fact that she can steal a lane back that you gave your Titania to is a huge deal. There are a lot of other cards that cannot do that. So Captain Marvel, definitely worth her weight in those situations. Also, a uniquely interesting card into Doctor Doom, because, you can Titania to fill up their lane before they can put a Doom in it. Then Captain Marvel, get your thing back. And Captain Marvel moves somewhere else to get or to +1 a Doom bot. Like, just a lot of cool things that you can do with this combination of cards. I think that generally those are the things that most people miss. Another thing to keep an eye on is, Cosmoing your opponent's Shuri and Shuri mirrors. You can sort of look into, whether they're snapping to get a sense of, if they expect to be able to Shuri. You can try to gain information based on how they're playing and see if you can maybe Cosmo their Shuri, or, if you're playing your own Shuri, maybe you don't get too greedy with it. There was a great play that Moyen made where there was a Kamartage on the board and he had a Shuri. His opponent did not snap. And he used that to read that his opponent did not have a Shuri. And thus, the reason the next play that actually beats him is they Cosmo his Shuri on the Kamartage. So he played his Shuri off of the Kamartage. There are a lot of situations like that you can really leverage skill and experience in with this deck. I do think that it is the best deck. I do think this is likely the best version, specifically for tournaments, because it beats the mirror so much. Definitely worth checking out. Next up is this list from Boomer, who made it to the top 4 with a very unique take on the bounce archetype. Now, this was before Hitmonkey came out, but I'm not even sure where I would want to fit Hitmonkey in this list. It all goes together so well. Like, when you look at all the things, I love that we got Mystique in here because we now have 2 targets for the Mystique. Iron Man is phenomenal at attacking Shuri lanes because you can actually go over the top of a Shuri'd Red Skull, thanks to the fact that Red Skull is buffing all of your units. So you get a big unit in there with an Iron Man and a couple small units. You are a real threat to go over the top. Opponents mostly don't know what to expect. Now, there is the significant downside of you can only really play Iron Man on turn 5, and I do think this deck leans heavily on Iron Man to be competitive in the Shuri matchup, but it's definitely an archetype to keep an eye on, and a great build of the deck for this tournament, where you end up seeing just a ton of Shuri at the top tables. I know that Boomer ended up losing in the top 4 to Moyen, who ended up winning the whole thing, so it's definitely not a deck to be taken lightly. This is the deck that gives me hope for Hitmonkey because, like, okay, let's say maybe the issue I have with it is instinctively the card I want to take out here for Hitmonkey is Darkhawk, because that means that we now have another stat stick in the form of Hitmonkey that makes this reliable. But here are the issues we run into. So first of all, if we take out Darkhawk, Mystique now only has 1 target. Second of all, we're often playing Iron Man on turn 5, which means we aren't bouncing stuff back to our hand for that big Hitmonkey turn on turn 6. Third, if we play Iron Man on turn 5, we are often wanting to play Mystique on turn 6, which limits the amount of plays we can make to go along with a Hitmonkey on turn 6. We can't play Mystique plus Mysterio plus Hitmonkey. We can't make it work. But I do think this is a good proof of concept in terms of maybe he made the deck worse in absolute terms by putting Mystique and Iron Man in here. It's entirely possible, but he made the deck so much better in relative terms against what he was going to be seeing in a tournament, which is to say, Shuri. This is a deck that can actually outpoint a Shuri lane. That matters. It's important. Now, one thing that Shuri players can do to combat this deck and really restrict its options are things like playing a Cosmo, which prevents you from being able to Mystique that lane. That's an important piece of knowledge to have. I know it's a very obvious thing to point out, but it's definitely something that came up. I saw Boomer's play being restricted by opposing Cosmos a lot throughout the tournament. That's definitely a thing that did happen. Now, I think that this is an archetype that is absolutely worth looking into. This is the best performing rogue archetype in the entire tournament. And a lot of that is, to Boomer's credit. It could just be that he's a phenomenal player. I don't really know, but I do think this is a big marker of improvement for an archetype that has languished for a very long time. Now, I know I said there were a ton of Shuri decks in the top 8. This is the only Shuri deck that was a significant outlier. It was played by Gosh, who is a grinder in these tournaments. Definitely someone worth respecting. And what he did was he built the deck for Shuri matchups. Now, I don't know how advisable that is in terms of winning the tournament, but it looks like it was extremely advisable in terms of making the top 8. The fact that he has Chavez in there to like more reliably draw his Sauron and his Shuri, important. It helps. The fact that he has this alternate game plan of being able to go wide with statures and titanias and ebony maws, that helps a ton too. I know he ran over a deck that was built to beat Shuri because he was doing something a little bit different from a normal Shuri list. If you're looking to be a hipster, if you want to still play Shuri and just be like, oh no, I'm playing the cool Shuri. I'm not playing the net deck Shuri. I'm playing the cool Shuri. This could be a choice you could make. Now, I think that it is honestly quite strong. I have never seen a better Sauron list than this. Hand to God. This is the best Sauron list I've ever seen. It actually leverages him to do something useful. The issue it does have is it opens you up to all sorts of new weaknesses. If you have priority on turn 5 and all your Ebony Moss get Killmonger, you're really sad, right? Like, there's a lot of issues that you can have, and I'm not sure it's actually better than the actual Shuri. And I think the major issue that it has is this deck does not win mirrors. This deck does not beat normal Shuri. It is very hard to beat the normal Shuri nut draw with a deck like this. Now, you might get some wins off of being unexpected. That's definitely possible. But generally speaking, the ones that are playing Taskmaster are going to go taller in 2 lanes than you can match. So outside of the top 8, the top cut was 5 and 2 and then tiebreakers. There are a couple decks that went 5 and 2 that I think are worth highlighting as potential under the radar options here. Right here we have Bast Patriot, which is a sort of under the radar archetype that's been burbling in some various discords recently, including mine. Now, it is a Patriot list that focuses on being a functional mid-range deck. In addition to being a Patriot list, we get to play actual cards here. This list was piloted by Visitron, and it's the third 5-drop feels a little iffy to me. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. I do like that we have an Iron Man for our Mystique as well. It feels hard to manage this. It's almost like a fusion between Bounce and a Patriot list. It's a very mid-rangey kind of interactive. We use Debris to disrupt. We have our Bast to hit Mysterio, things like that. There are some real power plays in here. It's also definitely a place that I might look to try to fit a Hit Monkey in. Definitely worth considering in that context as well. Now, I do think this archetype, I personally still currently prefer the Gunny Patriot list with Leech and Shang-Chi, but I do think that list is, a lot more boring, a lot more one note. This deck will have a lot of intriguing lines with it. Definitely worth talking about, in my opinion. Next up is a Doomwave list from Annie Amelie, who finished in, I believe, 15th place with this. I wanted to highlight it because I like Doomwave. I'm interested by the America Chavez inclusion. I think it makes you more likely to draw Wave, but less likely to draw Wave plus She-Hulk. That's kind of an interesting call to make, but maybe it's correct, especially with the potential for Hitmonkey decks to be on the rise. Wave on 5 just absolutely crushes those, so it's worth considering now that this list could be plausible. I do think this list struggles significantly with a Shuri deck that draws the right cards in the right order, but I think most things struggle significantly with a Shuri deck that draws the right cards in the right order, and it's nice to see a nice, fair, priority-based, good cards list making it to the top tables in this tournament, so shout out to Annie Amelie for sure. Finally, we have something that is completely out of left field from Johnson, aka Irim, the Korean sensation who has been brewing up all sorts of off-meta decks. This is his take on Shuri. No Cosmo, no armor, yes, Killmonger. I watched this deck come back from losing 8 cubes in the first game of a battle mode set the whole way against the deck that won the tournament in the hands of Braude, who is himself a tournament-winning player. Like, this is an archetype that gets a lot of value out of just being weird and unexpected. It also gets a lot of value out of actually playing Shang-Chi in the Shuri mirror. Now, the Invisible Woman was used to great effect. Like, there's a bunch of really cool things that you can do with the Invisible Woman. The major one I want to point out is you can just put an Ebony Maw under it, and that way it won't actually flip up, so you can keep playing behind the Ebony Maw. But the other thing you can do is you can hide your 1-drops under it. That's pretty cool too, because then you can Killmonger and your Ebony Maw won't immediately eat it. Now, there are some games with this deck that when you play it, you're just going to be like, oh, man, I'm doing nothing this game. Everything sucks and I hate it. That will happen. You kind of just have to live with it. Now, the inclusion of Captain Marvel is actually even better here than it is in the normal list, again, because you're playing an Ebony Maw kind of deck. This is definitely just something I wanted to highlight because of the uniqueness of it, but I believe he finished in, like, I want to say like 11th or 12th place here, 5-2, just missed the top 8 on tiebreakers. Definitely worth considering, especially since I saw it match up into the main Shuri list. I enjoyed watching this list get played. I couldn't not highlight it. It was spectacular. I really enjoy people who are on meta, but just off enough to still be surprising. So that is definitely a very cool list of Shuri that I'm a big fan of. Finally, I want to talk about Thanos. This build of Thanos actually made it to 9th place, missing on tiebreakers by just a tiny amount. This is the lane control build of Thanos. Currently, you know, without Kitty Pryde, without any of the new cards, I think that this is potentially the best Thanos list. I felt like it was favored into Shuri, but I should note that the player who got it to 5-2, Lelouch de Gaulle, noted that they actually lost both of their battle mode matchups to Shuri, so yikes. But I think maybe sometimes that can happen. It's definitely worth investigating because, you know, I thought it was good into Shuri and like maybe kind of weak into things like Killmonger, but there's really not a lot of Killmonger in this field. Like, this is a deck that is poised to strike right now. Definitely worth playing if you have Thanos and you want to play a sort of control play style. It is a hard lane control deck. You do have to do a lot of thinking when you play it. There's a lot of considerations you have to make. There are also some changes in the list. If you want to make them, feel free. I think, you know, Bishop, for example, you can think about changing. You keep Bishop in there because it's like pretty good with Valkyrie, things like that. But you can make considerations when it comes to a deck like this. Basically, your job here is to steal a lane and then steal another lane. Like, you're not your typical over-the-top Thanos deck. You steal a lane with, like, Daredevil Prophex or Daredevil Spider-Man. You steal the other lane with Valkyrie, and there you go. That's what you do. You have Valkyrie Soulstone, you have Valkyrie Bishop, you have just a bunch of stuff. Like Valkyrie, even Valkyrie Hood, if they have a full lane there. You should be good to go. That's pretty much what you're doing here. You are just stealing lanes as much as you can. Thanos is in there because Thanos is good, and Soulstone gives you another win condition with Valkyrie. Now, you do have to do a lot more thinking with this deck than you used to when Quinjet was around, because Quinjet made this deck run on easy mode, but unfortunately it also broke several other Thanos decks. I do think this is the only Thanos build that actually showed up in the top 16 of this tournament, which shows the dominance of Shuri, really. But what really makes me sad is we never got a chance to see if Kitty Pryde Thanos could make it because Kitty Pryde was disabled. I still retain hope for Kitty Pryde Thanos. I hope it works out. I really want Kitty Pryde Thanos to be good. And I am very happy that Thanos did make it here. I believe Revis was also close to the top tables of Thanos before losing a couple close ones. So his list ended up not in here. It's very close to my Kitty Pryde list, but obviously mine is Kitty Pryde. Sad days. Now, I hope you enjoyed this rundown of my favorite decks from Best of the Besties. I hope you enjoyed watching Best of the Besties. I never thought I would be in a position where I would have enough subscribers to host a sub-tournament with that many people in it. I am so grateful. Thank you so much to everyone who participated and everyone who watched. I can't thank you enough. From the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate everything that my community has done for me. Thank you so much. I'm KM Best. As always, hit those like and subscribe buttons. I'll see you in the next one. I feel like I've crushed that. I will be honest with you. I feel like I demolished that.